Hello, everyone. Today, we bring you an inspiring story about courage and determination. This is the story of a young lawyer who turned what seemed like a small incident, a traffic ticket, into the motivation to fight for justice and transform an entire system. This story isn't just about the law, it's a reminder that each of us has the power to make a difference, even if it starts with the smallest of actions. If you find this story meaningful, please take a moment to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel to support us. Don't forget to share this video with your friends and family, as it might inspire someone out there. Thank you for watching and supporting us. Now let's dive into this emotional and powerful journey together. Morning sunlight streamed through the car windows, casting shimmering streaks across the dashboard. Emily Carter, a young and ambitious lawyer, was driving down a road leading to a small town where she was about to attend the first major trial of her career. This was an important day, a turning point she had been preparing for over the past several months. Her business suit was perfectly pressed, her case files neatly arranged on the seat beside her, and her mind was filled with sharp arguments she had rehearsed countless times. But time was not on her side. A minor accident on the highway had delayed her by more than 20 minutes. She glanced at the clock on the dashboard, watching the minute hand tick forward as if mocking her patience. Emily took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "It's okay, I'll still make it," she reassured herself, pressing the gas pedal slightly harder to make up for lost time. As she approached an intersection, she noticed the traffic light turning from green to yellow. With her careful driving experience, she knew she had enough time to pass through before the light turned red. She maintained a steady speed, her eyes focused on the road ahead. But just as she crossed the intersection, a loud siren blared behind her, pulling her out of her thoughts. Emily glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the flashing lights of a police car. Her heart began to race. "No way," she muttered, slowly pulling over to the side of the road. The door of the police car opened and a tall man in a police uniform stepped out. Officer Daniels, a man known for his strictness in the town, approached her car with an air of authority. His face was cold, his sharp eyes scanning every detail. Emily rolled down her window, trying to keep her voice calm. "Good morning, officer. Is there a problem?" Daniels didn't respond immediately. He stared at her for a moment before speaking in a steady but commanding tone. "You just ran a red light at the intersection back there." Emily frowned, surprised by the accusation. "Officer, I think there's been a mistake. The light was still yellow when I went through." Daniels smirked, a half smile full of condescension. "City folks always think they're above the law, don't they? I saw it clearly. You ran the red light." Emily felt her face flush with frustration. She knew she wasn't in the wrong. "Officer, I have a dash cam in my car. If you'd like, I can show you the footage right now." But Daniels didn't care. He shook his head, his tone growing firmer. "I don't need to see it. I'm the law here, and I say you ran the red light. Here's your ticket." He pulled out a small notebook, quickly scribbled a few lines, tore off the ticket, and handed it to her. Emily looked at the paper, the $500 fine glaring back at her like a challenge. $500? She couldn't believe her eyes. "Officer, that's a lot of money, and I didn't do anything wrong. I'm going to contest this." Daniel shrugged, his expression indifferent. "You have the right to do that, but I'd think twice if I were you. The courts around here aren't exactly easy." With that, he turned and walked back to his car, leaving Emily sitting in hers, feeling both angry and helpless. She stared at the ticket in her hand, her frustration boiling over. "This is unbelievable," she muttered. But almost immediately, she regained her composure. Emily wasn't the type to back down easily, especially when she knew she was right. She pulled out her phone and reviewed the footage from her dashcam. Just as she remembered, the traffic light was still yellow when she passed through. The video was clear evidence of her innocence. Emily took a deep breath, her eyes hardening with determination. "If they want to play this game, I'll fight it to the end," she told herself. She knew that contesting this ticket wouldn't be easy, especially in a small town where the police and the courts often had close ties. But she also knew this wasn't just about $500. It was about principle, about not letting those in power abuse it to impose their will on others. Emily started her car and continued her journey to the courthouse. But this time, she wasn't just preparing for her client's trial. She was also preparing for another battle, a battle to defend the truth and justice for herself. As she drove, she couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. She wondered how many others had been in similar situations, wrongfully accused with no way to defend themselves. The thought only fueled her resolve. When she arrived in town, Emily parked her car in front of the courthouse, looking up at the old brick building with its weathered walls. This was where she would face not just one trial, but two. One for her client and one for herself. She stepped out of her car, carrying her case files and a USB drive containing the dashcam footage. The morning sunlight had softened, but inside her, a fire of determination burned brightly. "All right," she said quietly to herself. "Let's see how justice works around here." With steady steps, Emily walked into the courthouse, ready for whatever lay ahead. She didn't know that this seemingly small incident would mark the beginning of a journey that would change not only her life, but also the very system she was about to confront. The next morning, Emily Carter walked into the courthouse of the small town with a mix of determination and anxiety. The courthouse was an old building with faded red brick walls, exuding an air of authority, but also a sense of pressure. This was not only the place where she would defend her client in an important case, but also where she would face Officer Daniels and the town's legal system to prove her innocence. Emily had spent the entire night preparing. She had watched the dashcam footage over and over, scrutinizing every frame to ensure her evidence was irrefutable. She had also studied the state's traffic laws, searching for any clauses that could support her argument. But she knew that in a small town like this, the truth wasn't always the deciding factor. The relationships between the police, the judge, and other local authorities could complicate everything. As she stepped into the courtroom, Emily felt the weight of everyone's eyes on her. The courtroom was small, with old wooden benches and a heavy atmosphere. At the front, Judge Miller, a middle-aged man with silver hair and a stern face, sat on the high bench. He was the ultimate authority in this courthouse, and Emily had heard that he often leaned in favor of the local police. Officer Daniels was also present, standing in a corner of the room with a smug expression. He looked at Emily with an air of confidence, as if to say, "You don't stand a chance." But Emily refused to let his demeanor shake her. She took a deep breath, keeping herself calm and professional. When her case was called, Emily stepped forward, holding the USB drive containing the dashcam footage. Judge Miller peered at her over his glasses, his voice deep and commanding. "Attorney Carter, you're appealing this traffic citation, correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Emily replied, her voice clear and confident. "I believe I was wrongly accused, and I have evidence to prove it." The judge nodded, motioning for her to proceed. Emily began explaining the situation, from driving through the intersection while the light was still yellow to being stopped by Officer Daniels and accused of running a red light. She emphasized that the dashcam footage would clearly show she had not violated any traffic laws. When Emily plugged the USB into the courtroom's projector and played the video, all eyes turned to the screen. In the footage, the traffic light was clearly still yellow as her car passed through the intersection. The video ended, and Emily turned back to the judge, hoping the evidence would be convincing enough. But before the judge could say anything, Officer Daniels stepped forward, his voice brimming with confidence. "Your Honor, I don't deny that the video shows the light was yellow. However, I'd like to point out that, according to traffic laws, when a light turns yellow, drivers are required to slow down and prepare to stop, rather than speed up to pass through. Miss Carter's actions were dangerous and violated the spirit of the law." Emily felt a surge of anger rise within her. She knew Daniels was trying to twist the situation, turning clear evidence into a debate over personal interpretation. But she refused to be drawn into his game. "Your Honor," Emily countered, "traffic laws state that drivers are only required to stop when the light turns red. In this case, the light was still yellow, and I passed through the intersection safely. Officer Daniels' accusation that I ran a red light is simply incorrect." Judge Miller remained silent for a moment, as if weighing the arguments. He looked down at the video again, then turned to Daniels. "Officer Daniels, Miss Carter has provided clear evidence that the traffic light was still yellow. Do you have anything further to add?" Daniels shrugged but maintained his confident demeanor. "Your Honor, I was simply doing my duty. I believe Miss Carter's actions were unsafe, and I made my decision based on my professional judgment." Emily felt a wave of frustration wash over her. She knew that in cases like this, the word of a police officer often carried more weight, even when there was evidence to the contrary. But she wasn't about to give up. "Your Honor," she said, her voice growing stronger, "if we allow decisions to be based on personal opinions rather than clear evidence, it sets a dangerous precedent. I'm not just defending myself here. I'm defending the principle that the law must be based on truth and justice." The courtroom fell silent. Judge Miller stared at Emily for a long moment, then finally banged his gavel. "I will review this case and issue a ruling at a later time. Court is adjourned." Emily left the courtroom with mixed emotions. She knew she had done everything she could, but the outcome was still uncertain. As Daniels walked past her, he smirked and said, "You tried, but things don't work the same way here as they do in the city." Emily didn't respond. She knew this fight wasn't just about a traffic ticket. It was about standing up to a system that might not always be fair, and she wouldn't stop until the truth was acknowledged. As she stepped out of the courthouse, the midday sun shone down on her face. Emily took a deep breath, feeling the fire of determination burn brighter within her. She knew this was only the beginning, and she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The small courtroom was filled with tension as Judge Miller, after a long moment of deliberation, finally banged his gavel on the desk. He looked at Emily Carter over his glasses, his face betraying a hint of reluctance. "Attorney Carter," he said, his voice deep and cold, "after reviewing the evidence, I have decided to dismiss your traffic citation. However," he paused, his sharp gaze locking onto Emily, "I must say, appealing such a minor ticket like this is a waste of the court's time. Cases like this are not worth bringing to trial." The courtroom fell silent, with only the faint scratching of the court clerk's pen breaking the stillness. Emily felt a surge of anger rise within her. She had spent time and effort proving her innocence, and now, instead of receiving acknowledgement, she was being criticized for standing up for what was right. But instead of letting her frustration take over, Emily took a deep breath. This was her chance to speak up about what she had observed during her short time in this courtroom. "Your Honor," she began, her voice clear and firm, "I appreciate that you reviewed the evidence and made the right decision, but I cannot agree that this appeal was a waste of time." The courtroom began to stir. A few people sitting on the benches in the back, including a local journalist, looked up, paying close attention to her words. Emily continued, "I didn't appeal this ticket because of the $500. I appealed it because of principle. If I don't stand up for the truth, then who will? If we allow even the smallest mistakes to go unchallenged, it sets a dangerous precedent. And I believe that justice is never a waste of time." Judge Miller frowned but didn't interrupt her. Emily could feel the attention of everyone in the room, and she knew she had to keep going. "Your Honor," she said, her eyes sweeping across the courtroom, "in the short time I've been here, I've noticed something troubling. There is a clear disparity in how cases are handled. Those with resources and influence seem to receive more favorable treatment. Meanwhile, those who are vulnerable, those who lack the means to defend themselves, are often overlooked or treated unfairly." The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder. A few people nodded in agreement, while others whispered to one another. Officer Daniels, standing in the corner, frowned in discomfort but said nothing. Emily pressed on, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I'm not saying this to criticize any individual. I'm saying this because I believe we can do better. Justice should not be a privilege for the few. It must be a right for everyone, regardless of who they are, where they come from, or how much money they have in their bank account." She paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. "If we don't treat everyone fairly, this legal system loses its meaning, and I believe that all of us have a responsibility to ensure that justice is carried out properly." The courtroom fell into a heavy silence. Emily's words rippled through the room like a wave, touching the hearts of many. A few people sitting in the back began to clap, and the applause quickly spread throughout the room. Judge Miller banged his gavel, signaling for silence. He looked at Emily, his expression slightly softened, as though he was reflecting on what she had said. "Attorney Carter," he said, his voice lower, "I understand your point, but remember, changing a system is not an easy task." Emily nodded, her gaze steady. "I know, Your Honor, but I believe that if we don't start with the small things, change will never happen." When the hearing ended, Emily walked out of the courtroom, feeling both relieved and contemplative. She didn't know if her words had truly made a difference, but she knew she had done the right thing. Outside the courthouse, a young woman approached her. It was a local journalist who had been following the trial from the beginning. "Attorney Carter," the journalist said, her voice filled with enthusiasm, "your speech was incredible. I think people need to hear about this. Would you mind if I wrote an article about today's hearing?" Emily smiled, a little surprised but also grateful. "Of course. If it helps people understand the importance of justice, I'd be more than happy." The next day, The article appeared on the front page of the local newspaper with the headline, "Young Lawyer Fights for Justice in a Biased Courtroom." The article quickly gained attention from people in the town. Emily's words not only made people reflect on the legal system, but also inspired others to stand up for what was right. For Emily, this wasn't just a small victory. It was a turning point, the beginning of a long journey to fight for justice and fairness. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to face any challenge because she believed that as long as one person dared to stand up, change was always possible. The article titled, "Young Lawyer Fights for Justice in a Biased Courtroom," quickly went viral, not just in the small town, but also on larger media platforms. Emily Carter's words had struck a chord, addressing a painful issue in the judicial system that many had experienced but never dared to speak out about. Social media exploded with comments. One person wrote, "Finally, someone brave enough to speak the truth about the injustice in our legal system." Another shared, "Emily's story reminds me of the time I was wrongfully judged and had no chance to defend myself." Within just a few days, Emily received hundreds of emails and messages from people across the country, sharing their experiences of injustice within the judicial system. Some were victims of wrongful decisions, while others were young lawyers like Emily, feeling powerless in the face of the bias and unfairness they witnessed daily. Emily never imagined that her speech would have such a profound impact, but she knew this was an opportunity to do something bigger. Emily began participating in interviews on television and podcasts, where she shared her story and emphasized the need for reform in the judicial system. In one interview, she said, "Our legal system is built on the principle of fairness, but reality shows the opposite. We need to confront the truth that bias and injustice exist, and if we don't act, we will continue to harm the most vulnerable in our society." Her words not only captured the public's attention, but also that of major civil rights organizations. One of these organizations, the Equal Justice Alliance, reached out to Emily and invited her to join a research project on bias in the judicial system. Emily agreed immediately. She knew that to push for change, she needed data and concrete evidence. In the following months, Emily worked tirelessly alongside researchers, lawyers, and social activists. They collected data from thousands of cases across the country, analyzing how judges made decisions and comparing how defendants were treated based on factors such as race, gender, and economic status. The results were staggering. Their report revealed that individuals from minority groups were 30% more likely to be convicted than others in similar cases. Defendants without private attorneys often received harsher sentences. Wealthy individuals or those with connections frequently received preferential treatment in rulings. Emily felt heartbroken reading these numbers, but she also felt more determined than ever. She and her team didn't stop at collecting data. They organized workshops, inviting victims of injustice to share their stories. These personal accounts, combined with the data, painted a comprehensive picture of the systemic bias in the judicial system. With the report in hand, Emily and her team decided to take the issue to a higher level. They arranged a meeting with lawmakers in the Capitol to present their findings. In the meeting, Emily stood before a room full of senators, representatives, and legal experts. She felt the weight of the moment, but she knew this was her chance to create real change. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice clear and strong, "this report is not just about numbers. It is evidence that our judicial system is failing in its most fundamental duty, to ensure justice for all." She continued to present her findings, using both data and personal stories to illustrate the problem. She concluded her speech with a call to action. "We cannot continue to ignore this injustice. I urge you to act not just for those who have been harmed, but for the future of the legal system we all believe in." The room fell silent as she finished. A few lawmakers nodded, while others began discussing among themselves. Emily knew this was just the beginning, but she felt hopeful. Emily's and her team's efforts eventually led to the introduction of a new bill called the Fair Courts Act. This bill included key reform measures such as requiring all judges to undergo anti-bias training, increasing transparency in court proceedings, including making rulings and the reasoning behind decisions publicly available, establishing an independent commission to monitor and investigate cases with signs of bias. The bill received support from many civil rights organizations and social activists. However, it also faced opposition from some within the judicial system, who argued that the bill would complicate their work. Emily was undeterred. She continued to campaign, organizing public forums and using her voice to explain why the bill was necessary. Emily's story and the movement she started inspired people across the country. Young lawyers, social activists, and even ordinary citizens began joining the conversation about judicial reform. On social media, the hashtag #JusticeForAll became a trending topic, with thousands of posts sharing stories and opinions about the injustice in the legal system. Emily knew that this fight wouldn't end overnight, but she also knew she was no longer alone. The movement she had started had become a flame, spreading far and wide, igniting hope in those who had once felt powerless in the face of injustice. For Emily, this was more than just a movement. It was her mission, the reason she became a lawyer. And she wouldn't stop until justice was truly served for everyone. Legacy. A year had passed since the day Emily Carter stood before lawmakers, presenting her report on bias in the judicial system. Her relentless efforts and the movement she had sparked had brought about significant changes. Today, Emily returned to the very courthouse where it all began. A sense of familiarity washed over her as she stepped through the large wooden doors, but the atmosphere inside was entirely different. A new court, a new beginning. Emily walked into the courtroom where she had once stood before Judge Miller to defend the truth. But now, Judge Miller was no longer there. He had retired, and in his place was Judge Rebecca Hayes, a figure renowned for her fairness and integrity. Judge Hayes sat on the high bench dressed in a black judicial robe, her face radiating both warmth and seriousness. Emily had heard much about her, a woman who had fought tirelessly for the rights of the underprivileged and always prioritized justice above all else. The courtroom itself had undergone a transformation. The old, worn walls were now adorned with signs that read, "Justice for all." These words were not just a slogan, but a reminder of the goal the judicial system must strive to achieve. In one corner of the room, Emily noticed a new desk where legal aid staff were assisting defendants in preparing for their hearings. A nearby bulletin board listed the new services now available, including free legal assistance and interpretation services for non-English speakers. Emily smiled. These were the very changes she and other reform advocates had fought so hard to achieve. Reflecting on the journey. As she sat down on one of the wooden benches, Emily couldn't help but reflect on her journey. It had all started with a small traffic ticket. What seemed like an insignificant event had drawn her into a much larger battle, a fight against injustice and bias in the judicial system. She recalled the feeling of helplessness when Judge Miller had criticized her, but she also remembered the moment she decided to stand up and speak the truth. She could never have imagined that her speech that day would ignite a movement. From the first article about her story to the television interviews, to collaborating with civil rights organizations to gather data, each small step had led to a monumental change. She remembered the meeting with lawmakers where she presented her report. She recalled the nervousness she felt standing in a room full of powerful individuals, but also the hope she felt when she saw them listening and considering her words. And then, she remembered the moment when the Fair Courts Act was passed. It was a victory not just for her, but for everyone who had supported and fought for justice. A special letter. As Emily was lost in thought, a court staff member approached her and handed her an envelope. "Miss Carter, this letter was sent to our office and we thought you should have it," the staff member said with a smile. Emily opened the envelope and began to read. "Dear Miss Emily Carter, I am a second-year law student, and I want to express my deepest gratitude to you. Your story has inspired me and so many others. When I read about how you stood up against injustice, I realized that one person can indeed make a difference. I used to think that the legal system was too vast and complex to change, but you have shown that with courage and perseverance, we can achieve extraordinary things. I hope that one day, I can become a lawyer like you, a person who not only defends their clients, but also fights for justice and fairness. Thank you sincerely for everything you have done. With respect, Alex Nguyen." As Emily read the letter, a wave of emotion swept over her. She didn't just see admiration in the words, but also hope. Hope that the next generation would continue the work she had started, the legacy of change. When the court session began, Emily sat quietly observing. A small case was being heard, but the way everything unfolded filled her with pride. Judge Hayes listened carefully to both sides, asking questions with fairness and impartiality. The defendant, someone who couldn't afford a lawyer, was being supported by a legal aid staff member from the new assistance program. Everything was happening just as Emily had once dreamed, a truly fair judicial system where everyone had the opportunity to be heard and protected. When the session ended, Emily stepped out of the courtroom feeling a sense of relief and satisfaction. She looked up at the blue sky, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face. She knew her journey wasn't over. There was still much work to be done, many places in need of reform, and many people in need of help. But she also knew that she had left behind a legacy, a better judicial system, a stronger movement, and a generation full of hope. Emily smiled. She hadn't just changed one courtroom. She had changed the way people viewed justice, and that was a legacy she would always be proud of.